Between each day and its rightful rest, I stand serving our town's best. As I pour an ale or a bitter, and clean up the butts, put away the litter, I am audience and counsel to all who tell their tales before last call. All our tales are in common, bound by a single thread, unprofound. The coarse cord of discord darns the patchwork of all our yarns. Eris, despite being the bitch that she is, labors, and for us birds, all stories told at our hearths. Another thread runs through them all, to hold in glittering-eyed gall the audience of all humanity from now until eternity. No mere ambition a story does hold, but to own each wit, and when told or passed on to swallow the teller for embellishment or detail a bit fuller. And so as they wind through our words on towards another tongue, in a desperate path, many words from the one unravels. And here are my three favorite gits who night after night battle wits to lay claim to the original true story of all our lives and their entangled glory. Eris ensures that a new board is laid, a new discord arrayed. 3 stories, through their struggling, wind a fresh rope of words, the chaos divine. Academics, their souls smeared with ink. That smeary tool of those that think and live by it to an uncommon degree. The rest of us, at day's end, are free of work's reluctantly assumed role. Not these books, no, they take their story whole with personal caveats from the consensus that their sub-discipline has laid out for us. They deal with life in numbers, that cold language of distribution and errors, distilling the breathing world from the questionable. Having asserted the power of the effable over that which will not submit to measurements, they struggle and hand us science-wrought reins under pretense that they control anything at all in a world held in Eris's thrall.
And that is how my play, The Real Tragedy, begins. In this play, 3 scientists walk into a bar, watch a nature documentary, and discuss the science that they see in the nature documentary. And as they're watching it, I watch them. I look at how scientists create knowledge, how they structure their arguments about the science that they're seeing, what their premises and their assumptions are. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to watch the scientists, because we don't have enough time. All you're going to be able to see is the end of this play, in which the bartender who we just met tells you what he thinks of the entire enterprise.
There, you think, wind up your loose strings, put in the boxes, the pawns and the kings. This tale's been told. All laid to rest, no such luck. At most, at the very best, they'll be back next week, and she too. It's not as if they live to argue, but conversation, if it not be an utter bore, has to have a story's discord at its core. If everyone agreed, they say, for once agreeing, then no one would say anything interesting. It is in debate that the truth is converged upon. New questions build on old answers, and our truth is constantly refined. We begin at extremes, they say, and somehow find it. Or if they're lucky, they fail. Grab a beer, start again, and tell another tall tale.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Norton. So after that brief performance, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about why I write stories like this one. Or why, as I was said about me, I take photographs, and why I made all of these photographs into a book while I was doing a PhD in insect sound communication. Or why I make graphic art, which is based in science. These are art pieces made based on the scientific papers that talk about these animals, and then I build the animals back from the words that we say about them. Or why indeed do I write stories? So a lot of my friends that knew that I do this sort of thing, that I do both science and I do different forms of art, sent me an ad about a year ago for this place called the TEDxBerlinWomen, which is how I'm here. And what this place does is sort of unique. It asks about 40 people from the academy, scientists, social scientists, historians, writers, composers, to come together and live and work together for a year. And I thought, wow, I want to do that. And so I wanted to go to the Wissenschaftkolleg. The problem with this was I had to tell them why I wanted to do that. That's actually quite a difficult question, because why you want to do that? Well, up until then, I'd just done it because I felt like doing it. I didn't write stories for a purpose. I just wrote stories because stories were there to be told. And now I had to think about why I was going to do it. And so I started thinking about it. And the first thing that came to my mind is an essay I'd read when I was younger, which is Isaiah Berlin's essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox. And in this essay, he talks about the thinkers in the world and how the thinkers in the world think about it. And he splits the world into two sorts of people, the hedgehogs and the foxes. The hedgehogs, well, let's start with the foxes. The fox knows many things, he says. The fox, when he's hunted, will try all sorts of different strategies to get away from the hunter. He'll try and get into the water, he'll try and burrow, he'll try and climb up trees. But the hedgehog knows one big thing. The hedgehog will just curl into a ball and expect that's going to solve everything. At any rate, the world is full of hedgehogs and foxes, and he lists a whole series of men, and of course they're always men. There are hedgehogs and foxes. And I like to split the hedgehogs and foxes into two words, the specialists and this wonderful word that's gone away from the word, polymaths, people who do many things. And I thought, well, I'm a fox. Doesn't answer why I'm a fox, but I'm a fox. And it still didn't answer what I had to tell the Wissenschaftkolleg about. So I started thinking a little bit more about, why am I a fox? Why am I a fox? And something one of my professors used to say to me came back. When you can't answer a question, it's not because you're dumb, it's because the question is dumb. If you can frame your question better, the answer becomes self-evident. So let's unpack this question I've been asking. Why do I do this? That's evidently a dumb question. So let's unpack it. Who is this I? Who is this I I'm talking about? And this I is somebody who is no longer a student. And the reason I say this is it's extremely clear to most of the world today that if you're a student, you want to do both the arts and the sciences. It's a consensus we've all reached, I think, more or less. And if you're unconvinced, go and look at a couple of TED Talks, which is Ken Robinson's talk and Mae Jameson's talk. They make extremely good arguments for why, if you're a student, you want to be both an artist and a scientist at the same time. I'm talking about me as a practicing scientist. I am somebody who studies how insects make sound and how insects hear sound. What's that got to do with art? Why would I do it? It begins starting to answer why a practicing scientist would do art, starts with asking why a practicing scientist wouldn't do art. If you think back in the generations before science became a profession as it is today, people did everything. They did whatever it pleased them to do. But at some point, and you have to go to this argument by C.P. Snow called The Two Cultures, people stopped doing this. In the Two Cultures, this is a lecture that C.P. Snow gave at Cambridge, the Reed Lectures. He talked about how the world in the academy had split into these two cultures that never, ever spoke to each other, the humanities and the sciences. And not only did they never speak to each other, they also actively sneered at each other. It's just kind of sad. When he was talking about this, which is in 1959, I think, it was the humanities that had the upper hand. Imagine this time, this was Cambridge, Oxford. These were the dons. The things that you did were the things of the mind. You did literature, you did arts, you did the classics. Maybe you did maths, because maths was pure. But if you did science, you were a little bit grubby, because you dealt with the real world, and you didn't want to be one of those people. Today, it's changed. Today, science has the upper hand. And we transform the universe, right? So we're better. And the humanities, they're a little bit, sort of still a little bit muddled. And if any of you read this essay by Steven Pinker, he's kicked off this debate big time. And the humanities have responded by calling it crime against humanities. This is a debate that's still very, very alive. The two cultures are still very, very separate. So doing the two is actually problematic. And this is another reason it's extremely problematic. This is a chart of what happens to people starting PhDs in the UK. And I just want you to look at where it ends. About 0.45% of the people that begin a PhD will actually end up in a job in academia. That is a tiny percentage. If I'm one of those who's at the early end of that graph and wants to get there, and I want to get there, my immediate conclusion is, what should I do? Single-minded pursuit of a single thing. That's what you think is the natural thing to do. But what I want to do with my life, hopefully, is ask that question. Is that actually what you want to do? That single-minded pursuit of a single goal, which is science. And I think this is why you shouldn't do it, but I want to challenge it. Now, what is this I want to do? What is this? And that is making art. Of course, as you've seen, different things that I do. But it's not as simple as that, because all of us at some point in our life had made some form of art. Now, I'm taking a bit of a guess here, but I'm guessing everyone in this room has been dumped at least once. And you've written that soppy little poem or drawn that beautiful little picture that reminds you of the good things about it and try and bring you back to happiness. But that's wonderful, and it's important, but that's not the art I'm talking about. I'm talking about the art where you become part of a culture, the two cultures that I was talking about, where you converse with the conversation of the art world, where you talk to them, where you sit at their table. Not in a way as to dictate them, because that's the last thing you want to do. That kicks off the sort of argument that Steven Pinker kicked off. No, but in a genuine spirit of collaboration, to be part of a culture. That's what I want to do. And well, quite honestly, why would I want to do that? Now we can start to answer that question, because we know we have a defined question. Why would I, as a practicing scientist, want to be part of the culture of the humanities and the arts? So let's start to answer it. It took a long time, but let's start. There are two ways we can answer it. We can answer it in terms of the outward face of Janus, which is to the audience. What do I want my audience to get out of my art? And what do I want to get out of my art? So let's start with the audience, because that's genuinely easier. For my audience, I want to say that there's been a long tradition of communicating science. People have written popular science books. We've even seen movies and things that are based on the idea that this is what science has told us. This is what it has proved. This is how it describes the world. So the results of science have always been talked about. But what hasn't been done is how science is made. There has been no tradition of the process of science, what my life as a scientist is like. Very, very, very few people have an idea of it. I bet you if I asked you, most of you, what a scientist looked like, you'll probably say he's a guy. You'll probably say he's wearing a white lab coat. And you'll probably say he's standing next to a big instrument. That's not what science is like. And what I want is to create a notion in your head of what that real human enterprise that we've done is like. And there are different reasons for this. One of them is we all consume science now, all of the time. Technology is a product of science. But even things like science policy are a product of science. And if we're going to consume the products of science, we need to understand how it was made in the first place. We also need to understand that the people that make the science are people. They've got their own motivations, they've got their own drives, they've got their own agendas. But more importantly, they've got lives. And if we don't understand what scientists are like, it's like not understanding, a tenth of humanity today. it's a human enterprise that we've all taken up, and it modifies how we live and behave. And I want to create a culture that talks about that set of people. So that's what I want to do for my audience. What do I want to do for myself? What do I get out of it, right? So different things. One of the things that's been said consistently about science is that it's analytical, and it's said about arts is that it's creative. That's bullshit. Anybody who's either a practicing scientist or a practicing artist will tell you they're both creative and both analytical. They might be slightly different balances, but they are both things. And by doing them, you are feeding into each other. So, practice of art is not fundamentally different from practice of science. And it's all good because it's practice for life. The other reason is, this is my own personal empirical finding, that you succeed a little bit more rarely in science than you do in the arts. You accomplish things just a little bit more often in arts. And if you're going to do that, you just feel better about yourself. It makes it easier to do the hard stuff, the science. So that's one reason I do it. I feel a sense of accomplishment from doing it. And finally, art is a form of play. And again, the world knows today that play is great for us. Nowhere like Google to say this, right? I spent the whole morning playing with the Google Earth device outside. And these are all very good reasons when I'm looking inwards for why I would do art. But I'll tell you what, I don't believe them. I don't believe these reasons. And the reason I don't believe these reasons is they're instrumental. What they are saying is that my art is a means to an end. That I'm doing it to do something for myself. But actually, that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing art for its own sake. I am really, really doing it for its own sake. And why would I do it for its own sake? Because I think the arts or the humanities way of looking at the world is valuable. What I want to say, what I want to signal to the world is that me as a practicing scientist thinks that these things are important and valuable. We need them in the world. And some people might argue that one way to ascribe value to something is simply to buy it, to consume it. Why not do that? I can buy art. For one thing, you can't really buy it on a scientist's salary. The second thing is that once you get into the market, there are a whole bunch of new things that arise. And one of the things that arises is art has now become a way to hold value. And that's what determines what arts get made. And as a result, you don't really directly engage with the art itself. Buying something is not the same as being part of that culture. Your own time is way more valuable than your money. And it's a way clearer signal of what you think is valuable. So I think buying something's not the way to go to say it's valuable. Spend your time on it. And that's why I spend my time making art. And it ties up with my personal vision of true participation in a culture. And that's why I do art. Now I want to turn this whole thing on its head a little bit. And this is sort of an invitation for people. And talk about people who aren't scientists doing science. Just as I am not an artist who wants to do art, I invite people all over the world to do science. Because you know what? Science is too important to leave it to the scientists. They're also driven by the same forces of the market that art is driven by. So consider what science you'd like to see in the world and do some. If you think about the very beginnings of science, it was done essentially by really rich folk, people who could do whatever they wanted, and they chose to do science. If you look at some of those people who fell out of the scientific path today, some of them are going back and becoming, well, used to be gentlemen scientists, now they're becoming independent scientists. They're going back and doing the things they value, not something that the scientific enterprise is telling them is valuable and that they should do. They're doing the things they want to do. And I'd invite people to do that. There are many, many scientists doing what they call citizen science, where they use people and their knowledge to try and understand the world. And I think that's valuable. But I think, as my friend Shamal says, it's much more valuable when citizens themselves determine what science they want done and do it. we're in a new world. So let's break these boundaries of who's supposed to be a scientist and who's supposed to be an artist. And I want to do that, and that's why I tell stories. Thank you. Okay.